Now we'll hear Marco Susani from Milano. He's an architect and a designer. He runs his own company, and he's also running the Smart Tools Lab at Domus Academy. His main interest at the moment is the space of telecommunications, and that's not virtual space for him. It's physical space and non-physical space. He's working on the solutions we need to build Pauline's home. Marco, where are you?
Good afternoon. Does it work? Yes. What I would like first is to propose a possible model of home that is maybe not so innovative. I had some doubts this morning whether or not include these images as the first image, because I wanted to avoid to form two parties, the party of the plugged and the party of the unplugged, and I wanted to avoid to be taken as the nostalgic unplugged part, even if in some way I like some of this thinking. But anyway, this is an unplugged home, and what I like of that image is that is very self-explanatory of a certain idea of materiality. And the reason why I want to put it as a first image is that it's because I believe that we should concentrate a lot on materiality, on what we have of physical around us. Maybe not just to stick on it, but to learn from it, to understand how we dealt with materialities since millions of years, and to learn eventually how to deal with a slight change in these materialities. The other thing that I like in this image is that you can feel in some way some sedimentation, and this is another concept that I feel quite interesting for the things we are speaking about. You can see nice panda pictures, nice objects around and so on. And you can imagine that it took some time and some personal involvement in growing this house, even if it's not probably what we consider the ultimate aesthetical home. So the issue we have to face is what happened to that house, what happened to the home that is still and was warm and smelly and very material. And not by chance, the microclimate and the smell sense are two senses that are difficult to reproduce. So anyway, let's try not to lose and to miss this part of the sensoriality. So in some way, I was saying we should maybe not just choose between being plugged or unplugged, but we have in some way, as designers, the commitment of analyzing with the technologies that are coming to the home, and to see and eventually to be selecting on them, and to see which we allow to get into the home and which ones we stop outside the home. So the issue is how we introduce technology into the home, how we make them acceptable, not to sell them, but just to learn how we can deal with them, and to be toughly selective in taking out what we really don't feel should fit in home. All this possibly increasing the quality, so we are really trying to do many jobs together, and to see if we could increase the qualities, the material qualities that we found in the first image, and to add something more to it without cutting anything. So what's happening to this home? Something already happened, and you can see it here, and everybody of you know that the TV first intruded in our home since a long time. I've heard in these days many descriptions of American families sitting down watching a TV. What I like here is that they are sitting down not watching the TV. In some way, ignoring totally the TV. But the nice thing in this image is that I can imagine the soundtrack and I can describe it to you, and probably you hear the sound of the dishes, and probably they are speaking themselves, and so you have the sound of chatting and chewing and everything. And probably they comment to what the person is saying from the TV, and maybe sometimes that could be some bad comment about this guy is saying in the TV and so on. So generally speaking, what I like of this image is that it explains us that there is some new hierarchy in the space of the home, because in fact it's difficult to say how many persons are present in that room. Are 3 or 4 of them? So something is changing in the space. But definitely we can say that in the material world we keep the hierarchy, and 3 people are saying to the 4th one that he is stupid and they can do this, and the 3 people are all together and the 4th one is far away, not only physically. So this is in some way tuned with some theories that sometimes describe good technology or the best technology as the technology that disappears. It's a very sophisticated concept that maybe I'm not even able to explain you now, but in some way I agree with this. I agree with the most, let's say, banal part of it, that is, I like the techniques and the technologies that I don't see, because I don't see the need of seeing them. What I like here is that possibly we can state that the best technology in the home is the one that you can eventually ignore, like they are doing. So what is good in introducing a new technology into the home is that there is always the possibility to turn it off, or at least if we want to be selective on the technology to introduce in the home, we have to choose the ones that we could eventually turn off. There is a nice aspect also in this image, that is that maybe it's typically Italian or Mediterranean, this story, but the TV didn't succeed in changing the space of the home, the physical layouting of the furniture. It was fighting with another maybe not very nice aspect, that is the need of having what in Italy we call the salotto buono, the nice living room, usually a living room in which you don't even live, but it should be there, locked, and where you should have the sofa and the 2 chairs facing. So in many houses in Italy, including the one I was living with my parents, we had the sofa, the 2 chairs, the TV on the other side, and we were sitting on the back of the chair, turned outside to look at the TV, because mainly we were looking at the TV. But what I like of this is that the chairs resisted to the TV. And I think that this aspect of physical resistance of the home to the intrusion of media, of new technologies and so on, I think this is a good example of the resistance of the material world toward the immaterial or virtual or communication space. So to understand something more and to add something to this story, I just did some schemes to explain a 3-second history of what happened to our house in the last period, in the last maybe 50 years. Some objects, more objects, some of them we keep them in the hands and so on. And many objects, active objects. So what does this mean? That we, first of all, we have the space flooded with low quality objects, that the last 50 years brought into our home many things, many stuff, many objects, and many of them were almost unuseful. Everything was, somebody says, related to the pleasure of buying. But anyway, in some way, we could consider that we have reached a situation in which we reached a ultimate level of possibility, in the sense that we start to think that eventually we made something wrong and we can shift a little bit. What is particularly important in the case of active objects is that not only they have a physical presence in our place, but they act, they create different hierarchies and so on. So this starts to put an additional problem of considering how the space is organized when the machines are on and how the space is organized when the machines are off. So we are dealing with a situation in which we have an history of low quality and high quantity of objects. As a designers, let's speak just about the material world. We discovered this, and we discovered also that it was partly our responsibility, having flooded the house of people of junk and of unuseful objects. So there is a consideration going on in the culture of design that starts to say maybe we should blame ourselves in some way, and we should discover that we have to do something different. What I try to propose is a possible parallel that maybe is a little early for the world of information, but what if we apply the model that we discovered didn't work in the material world in the world of information? What if the perspective that we have in front could eventually become a perspective of low quality and high quantity of information, and how we could deal with this? So here I just put some notes on which are the issues we face in this case. So we know that the world of object is becoming increasingly present and crowded. And we understand that our notion of comfort is changing. In the past, comfort was having more machines, having more objects, and mainly being replaced by the machine in the home. We can start to think that the comfort, a new idea of comfort, is to limit the machine, simply to decide what I want to do and what I want the machine to do. So it's a more delicate approach to deciding what the machine has to do and which machine I want in my home. And the third story is that once you deal as a designer with, let's say, smart objects, designing their shape is not enough. You have to design in some way their behavior, or in some way to limit their behavior. So we start to be in some way not progressive, in the sense that we start for the first time to consider that the progress and the innovation is in returning back, in looking our history, our very distant history, and to see why we don't have, with the new machines that we use, with the new technologies that we have in home, we don't have any relation, any deep relation that we used to have with the archetype, with the archetypical tools, with the tools that we are used to manipulate since the history of man, like the hammer, the scissors, and so on. So could we eventually create a new relation with the object that can recreate this relation and approach with the ancient tools? And this is, let's say, the most near approach. We can leave the quantity or reduce slightly the quantity of objects and try to design them more. Then we could propose a more strong cultural change, that is deciding strongly to reduce the quantity of objects and information. This is in some way a strong statement because it's not in our culture, it's not in our economical system, and this makes it quite a problem. But we could start stating that at least the notion of richness interior and exterior one, could be related to reducing and to throwing away things and so on, instead than increasing the quantity of objects and information, and that our main issue is to increase the quality of life and not the quantity of the stuff we put in it. We have a I have a parallel to this that maybe explains that this perspective of reduction is not necessarily a sad return to the bushes or a sad return to some moralistic attitude of pauperism and so on. Recently, maybe not even so recently, in Italy there is a movement called slow food that is opposite to the fast food. That is people, that is, it's true, it's not a joke. It's a real organization that is called Slow Food that goes in the places in Italy, and we still have some of them, where there is a good quality of food, where we still have some grandmother that knows how to cook and how exactly to grow the things and so on, and start to understand which pleasure is inside this. So this is a pleasure in slowing down things and in synthesis. Again, I have again to keep this gastronomic image because Italian cuisine is very synthetic. We don't have all the sauces of the French people. We just have plain ingredients. And this, again, reminds to the possibility of keeping a good quality of food, that is a good quality of life, reducing or staying to some very limited, clear, defined, synthetic ingredients attitude. In some way, this is can define as something that puts together the culture of the peasants and the culture of the aristocrats, cutting out the culture of bourgeoisie that we probably hate all. Because there is some of the material culture of the peasants, of relating to everyday life and so on, and something of the aristocracy that don't need too many things. They have more slaves that do the job, not machines, and so on. So if we take it in a positive way, this culture of reduction could be in some way presented as a new kind of existence minimum that has the maximum of quality. From those of you that are not architects, existence minimum was a statement of the modern movement that was suggesting to reduce as much as possible the dimension of the home to give the home to more people possible. So it was in some way a positive attitude. What it brought was the reduction to a minimum of the home of everybody, so everybody of us lives in a very small dimension and with a very limited number of square meters. We could think that this existence minimum is translated as a reduction of the quantity of things, keeping in mind the quality of things. So from all this comes a possible definition of the home that is simply, no matter if material or virtual or immaterial, but it's simply a place where I don't want any junk. And it's up to you to decide what is junk and so on. And what I added is that I want to define it as a real place, a deep and rich place, and eventually we could set some virtual or immaterial presence if it's able to be real, deep, and rich presence. Then we have another story parallel to the one of the home flooded of objects. That is what happened to our bodies. And still we have to question what happened to our warm, smelly, and material body, because finally it's still like this. What happened is that the objects became portable, miniaturized, electronics, powerful, battery powered. So we started to have a lot of nice objects with us. For some, including myself, this means and meant to be nomadic, to have a different way of life, to be able to be everywhere, at home, and so on. The problem raises when these objects start to be plugged, communicating. So all the objects we have on our body start to have some wave around. And the danger is to become a new San Sebastian with 12 plugs plugged in. So this is simply, it's not just a statement of criticism, it's a real design attitude. So as much as possible, we would like to avoid the plugging in, and we would like to avoid to bring too many things on our body. And I have a serious, this time, example of this. I'm working on a project of technologies for disabled, so people that in some way strongly needs technology without maybe too much ethical consideration on whether the technologies are material or not and so on. But what we tried in this project is as much as possible avoid arriving to the plug-in. Of course, if you arrive to some technologies like prosthesis and so on, and if people doesn't have some part of the body like active arms and so on, if you arrive to this limit, you have in some way to plug in, because it is possible to use the nerval stimulation to move a prosthesis and so on. But we wanted to place this line between plugged and unplugged, even for people that needs technology as a real need, as much as possible, as far as possible, sorry. So anyway, as soon as the person has a partial activity, we wanted to push this activity. We wanted to use the technologies to make the person act, not to replace the activity, even the limited activity that the person has. So trying to summarize some issues that are three main areas of thinking. One is that our relation with space when we deal with new communication and new technologies is changing, that our notion of territory is changing, because anyway we have part of the virtual territory, that the space of the house has anyway some strange windows somewhere, and that the design of this space implies anyway that part of it is simulated. So let's accept it, and let's take the challenge of mixing the two and bringing everything into the material world. The other thing that is happening, and that again possibly shift all the project to something that remains material, is that there are some metaphors of organization of information that still are very spatial and material. And so in some way the analogy with designing a space and organizing the space and deciding where are the hierarchies, the axes, the perspective, the central perspective and so on, is anyway of help. And let's mix this with the considerations that we did before, so that our approach to consumerism is changing. So how we match the two structural changes of the changement of the notion of space and of information, with the fact that anyway we want to have a more deep relation with what we have around. We did spend some time trying to understand if we needed a new discipline to deal with all this, and as I was mentioning before, we just discovered that we already have a discipline. Now, I don't know if the translation of material culture is correct, but by material culture we mean everything that is able to study, analyze, and describe what's happening in the home and how we relate with physical objects, with the relation between persons, how we prepare food, how we speak at the phone, and so on. So could we eventually update this discipline of that usually is relegated in studying in museum how in the ancient Roman Empire they were behaving in the material culture, but let's update it and let's try to put some of these qualities into the projects we have to face. And here we bring some other stories that are more related to not only our discipline of designers, but also some other disciplines that we started to look at and we started to understand. that is mainly understanding if there are some anthropological relation into the spaces of the home with the ancient tools and possibly with the new tools. So if there is any anthropological limit, for example, to the quantity of information that comes, I'm not speaking just about the cognitive load of having many information, but just accepting as persons the fact that we have 100 TVs into the home, or too many information, or too many phone calls, and so on. And this is eventually a possible, an absolute level of flooding that eventually we have reached, or eventually we have to be careful not to reach. So I prepared just two scenarios of home that could be not necessarily the best scenarios, not necessarily one alternative to the other one, but just two possible scenarios. I call the first one the sensible home because the sense, sensibility, sensitivity, sensoriality, and so on, it's a kind of work that I like. And mainly the meaning that I want to attach to this is the first one, maybe a game with the wording, that the most interesting sense-like word is make sense. So in some way, the first thing that we want our home to do is to make sense, to produce meaning, to have significance. So this is in some way related to the fact of cancelling the junk and keeping a strong, deep qualities in what happens into the home. The second meaning that we could attach to the sensible home is that it could be a place where the senses are enhanced, or simply where the senses, the sensoriality, our feeling is in a good position, in a good place. And this has to deal with the sensorial qualities of the material space and of the virtual space. And the third meaning that we could attach to the sensible home is that the home itself could be sensitive, could in some way act as a filter to take out some of the information, or to just be selective, to keep it for a while and then to give it to us. To explain how this is in some way not so related just with saying let's be unplugged, I want to quote two almost unplugged opinion by famous people. And the first one is by Ettore Sottsass, that probably some of you know. He is a well-known architect. And in a congress in Venice about multimedia, he has been invited to give his opinion about multimedia. And he said, well, maybe they are nice, but actually I really cannot imagine something that is better than taking a book, going in the sunshine in my terrace in Filicudi, and passing page by page reading the book. And the second opinion, an almost unplugged opinion, is the one of Tonino Guerra, that has been for a long, long time a co-writer of the movies of Federico Fellini. And when they asked him what you think about electronic technologies in cinema and so on, he said, frankly, I don't give a damn about technology. They can eventually give a lot of machine to us, but what I want to find is a director with poetry. What I need today, what I want to hear today, is somebody that has something to say, some poetry to express. So the reason why I quote these two opinions is, again, because they seem unplugged, but they come from two people. Ettore Sottsass is probably the most iconoclast of the architects, so for sure we cannot define him as a reactive to evolution. And the second one, because Tonino Guerra worked in cinema, so he is one of the founders of a new medium that was cinema. But simply what changes is that what I feel in this opinion is that they are very selective on technologies. If technology is not able to recreate the same material quality that we got from the old medium of expression, well, let's just forget about them. It's not finished. No, I just go fast. just, okay, going on this idea of sensible home, maybe I go fast with this image. This is just to show how the presences into the home are changing our relation with the space. We have in some way presences that come from the home itself that starts to speak with us. And we have possibilities of looking outside our home. And we have the possibility of get intrusion in our home. And again, the statement I was saying before is that let's try to build a sensible home. So all these presences are well organized. Then the second issue is how we organize the space. The example we have is the one of the couch potato. What we would like to avoid is to become a mega screen potato. So to keep the same strong central perspective that people was expecting from us to looking at the TV, and not replacing with this. What I have here is just some examples, but this is just a sketch that was done during a brainstorming that I did with NTT, that is the Japanese telephone company, on communication spaces. And it's just a possibility of organizing a space into the screen that is not just imitative of paper and windows and so on. A space in which the presence of persons is combined with information and everything combined with a simulated space. But probably what is better explained as the space of co-presence work of William Hogarth, that is a perfect recreation of a perspective that is not a perspective, because it has some games into this perspective. It has some hierarchies in the scale that was one of the interesting expression of the pre-perspective paintings and so on. So probably what we could develop is a kind of space that combines all these things together. Then one other possibility to avoid the couch potato, mega screen potato effect is to dissolve the presences, sorry, I go fast, because to dissolve the presences of the communication into the home. And again, this is some example of, again, a brainstorming done for video communication into the home. And they are related to the possibility of, let's say, working and speaking with people, with distant people, in a situation in which you are not concentrated on a screen, but you split anyway the presence of the person with the paper or virtual paper you are working with. And maybe if I go slightly faster, I can show you a more understandable example. This is a project of a student in Domus Academy where I teach. That was the application of this idea of trying to materialize the physical presence of the person in telecommunication. So this is working device to work in a distance, where the communication of the face is always split from the communication in working together. And what happens finally is that you have this strange material presence of people. And this is a brainstorming, a telecommunication brainstorming. And then this one was also his proposal of home. The second scenario is what I call wherever I lay my head, that's my home. That is a famous song. That is the possibility of living everywhere and of feeling at home everywhere. And this possibility is, again, as we are saying, possible with technology. Then we have just to understand if we want to do this. And also in this case, what we have is the possibility that the territory that is formed by our person is transformed in a very increased ability to reach any place with the communication, and the possibility of being intruded by other presences in our territory. And again, also in this case, what could help is that if the home works as a sensible shield to the information, a filter, an agent, and so on, and is able to stop the communication that we don't want. I have also an example in this that is a work, again, done by a student in Domus Academy. The issue was study how people behave when telecommunicating around the city, for example, and how they behave when they speak with a cellular phone in a corner and so on. And this was a nice, provocative result that I find very poetic and very nice. And this is presented as a real project of an inflatable personal territory that you could use just to isolate yourself. The name of the... So I have to give credit, the student is called Max Herr, and he was very good. But simply, we have to take this as a project, and as all the projects, they are maybe not a decision of we have to do like this or not, but just a poetic representation of what already exists. If you go to Piazza del Duomo today, you see people that speaks like this. They don't have the cocoon, but the story is the same. Whether we consider this as a too strong isolation or the smallest dimension of our home, it's up to us. So to conclude, because I guess it's too late, to return to the question in the beginning, the fact is that the house is still there, and it's already there in the sense that we don't have to do so much to create a nice place to live. We simply have to think to a possible, as I was saying, renaissance of the material culture, to return to study and to understand how we behave, how we move, and so on. And to return to a place that is just a very nice place to stay, a place where we keep anyway all the smell or the material and all the sensorial qualities of the traditional home, simply trying to add some additional quality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. I feel actually like going home now and design something. But I'll stay. It's tea now, 10 minutes, and then we go on with David Chow.